This is Lexi Gross.
And today we're going to be talking about this data visualization. So let's pull this up. And Lexi is looking at this for the first time. So tell me, Lexi, as a fourth grade student, what are some things that might pop out to you?
Well, I noticed that the title of this data visualization is Timeline of the U.S. Economic History, and it's talking about the U.S. GDP by year and the major economic events and recessions that occurred.
Okay, and let's pull this down. And what do we see on the bottom?
I noticed that there's a timeline of the years, and it starts in 1929 and it ends in 2019.
Nice. What do you see on the y-axis? Do you know what the y-axis is?
Well, I see that it's about real GDP, and the bottom is $1 trillion, and the top is $20 trillion.
Wow, that's a lot of money, isn't it?
It is a lot of money.
Do you know what GDP means?
No, I don't remember.
Yeah, that's a hard word. It's actually called gross domestic product.
Okay.
So that really talks about how much money or how much value the U.S. has.
Okay.
So if we look at the years, we are starting at what year, Lexi?
We're starting at 1929.
Okay, then what year do we end with?
We end in 2019.
Perfect. Okay, so we're gonna look at these pictures and see what are things that we've talked about in class before. What are things maybe you've seen on TV or anything? Flags or pictures?
Well, I noticed that right here is the American flag, so that's ours. This looks like a tank that you'd see like in a military.
Like a war movie or something?
Yeah. This looks like some type of governmental building.
Yeah.
And then the earth, and then let's see. These look like they're important people. I'm not sure who they are, but they seem like they're pretty important with their outfits that they're wearing. Here's some gold. This looks like a medical sign of some sort.
It does.
Well, it says moon landing, so I'm assuming it's when the Americans landed on the moon because of the American flag. Technology, maybe that's when that started happening. Here's some money. And then I see this says taxes, and that looks like Donald Trump.
Yeah, do you remember talking about Donald Trump in class?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, is he still the president?
He is, yes.
Okay, gotcha. Very cool. Okay, let's see down here. What do you think these marks are right on this line? Because we don't see all these years, we only see a couple different years. So why do you think there's these ticks?
Well, maybe it's when the bubbles at the top, maybe that's like what it's depicting.
Yeah, I think each one of these ticks represents a year. So it's interesting that some of the years are represented. So yeah, I think the big numbers are when big events happen. So we can see down here some more about the debt. So that's like all the money we spent.
Yeah.
And another war happening in two countries. And then we can also see the Vietnam War and Black Monday, which we haven't talked about yet in class. But these are some more statistics, which are numbers that we compare to actually look at GDP, which is the amount of gross domestic product. So if we come back to the top, we can look back at this. As a fourth grader, Lexi, what do you think are some confusing things that you see on this graph?
Well, I see that this starts out light and then it just gets darker over time. So I'm not really sure why that happens. Another thing that kind of confuses me is like, I guess those are bigger than others. And I don't know if it's like about time or what, but there's not a ton of them. There's only a few.
Yes. Do you know what a recession is?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, that's a really confusing term. So basically, recessions are when there's hard times happening in America and we lose a lot of money.
Okay.
So recessions are when a lot of people lose their jobs or become unemployed. So if we look right here, 1929, we talked about in class about the Great Depression and how a lot of people lost their jobs because of the stock market collapsing. So if we look at this, all these periods of the purple are when a recession happened. And if you remember when you were a little girl, that was in 2008 and 2007. That's when another really big recession happened.
Okay.
And then also, if we look at the colors, this shows the amount of the budget spending. So remember, we're talking about the actual economic events and recessions. So if we're looking at the trillions, we can talk about the different colors represent the amount of money being spent.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Have you ever talked to your grandparents before about when they grew up?
A little bit.
Yeah. Sometimes I talk to my grandma and we talk about how much gas used to cost like 100 years ago, and it was so much cheaper. So just like gas prices 100 years ago, the cost of the government was a lot cheaper because things cost a lot less money. So it's interesting to think about because as we go up, you can see that this line gets darker. So that would be cool to talk about with the class about how things cost a lot more now. And Have you ever heard of the term minimum wage?
Yes.
Yeah, so a lot of workers make minimum wage, which means the minimum amount they can make in a job.
Okay.
And so when we started in 1929 doing minimum wage in this graph, it was a lot smaller, so they made a lot less money 100 years ago. So it's interesting to talk about.
That is interesting.
Okay. If there's something I wanted you to learn about this graph, what's something you think would be interesting to talk about based on this graph?
Maybe like what certain events happen. Depend on like or influence like what happens in the economy.
Are there any events on here that you think we've talked about before or we might talk about this year?
Well, I feel like we'll talk about maybe like depressions, like how that began then.
That one, yep.
Yeah. Maybe we'll talk about
pull this one down too.
Like different wars and stuff, like the Cold War.
Yeah.
And maybe the Vietnam War.
Do you think wars cost a lot of money, or do you think they're pretty cheap?
For sure.
Yeah. So wars are definitely a big thing with the debt, and you can see by that if we pull up even the Vietnam War, you see how big that line is and how far it goes.
That is a big line.
It's very interesting. So we can compare each line and see how steep it was, and this one looks so steep, and that was in the 90s. So it's interesting to compare now into the beginning. So do you have any other questions you'd like to ask about this graph?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to use this graph in front of the classroom and we're going to talk about it. So I wanted to give you a preview. So we're going to start our lesson on economics. And so I think it's really important to understand that economics means money in the economy. And we're able to talk about how different people have jobs and there's always different supply and demand of jobs.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lexi.
Thank you.
Do you have any further questions for me?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. Great job.